I'd like to say this is the history lesson for Monday or Tuesday or whatever, but the truth of the matter is that it's actually two different history lessons because there are two different history groups. So if you're in the group that has history lesson on Tuesdays, period 5, then this is the lesson for Tuesday, period 5. If you're in the history group who has two lessons on a Thursday, then this is the lesson for Thursday, period 5. Bit confusing, but the content is the same for each one. What I want to talk about today is sources questions, because as you will no doubt remember, before the Easter holidays, I said there was going to be a full-length sources question coming up, and that is still the intention. It's not going to be today, but I'm going to spend today talking to you about how it is going to be carried out, what it is, and how it's going to work, and what you should do. When is it is a good question. If you're listening to this or because it's a Tuesday, then you will be, let's have a look at the notes, you will be completing the source question on Thursday, the 23rd of April, period 1. If you are listening to this on Thursday, the 23rd of April, period 5, yours is on Friday, as in tomorrow. So pay careful attention. But I can get around that because I did tell both classes that this was coming up. So lack of preparation is nothing to do with me. Right. So this will be the first time we've encountered the only source question in the British paper. The source questions themselves will be pretty similar in style whenever you encounter them. So your mock will be like this, the one you do soon will be like this, and the one you do at the end of your A-level will be like this. You will be asked, using these four sources in their historical context, assess how far they support the view that, and then there'll be something. Now, the view that will usually be given will be something like X was the most important reason for Y, or X was due to Y, or Y happened because of X. In other words, this is a cause and effect style question, but it's answered through the medium of sources. It's not just why did something happen, it's according to the sources, why did something happen. It's also worth 30 marks, which is more than the essay. So you do a 30-mark source question, and then you choose one from two 20-mark essay questions. Before we get on to what you do need, I want to spend a bit of time on what you don't need. Oh, subliminal Gladstone. Right. Things you don't need. That could happen at any given point. You know, you might just get a random Gladstone picture there. Right. I'm going to stop mucking about now. This is serious stuff. Okay. What you would never say, you never say with the source, oh, this is a primary source. Okay. For one thing, they're all primary sources. But for another thing, you're A-level candidates. Okay. You get precisely nothing for being able to point out the difference between a primary and secondary source. Another thing which gains you nil points is, ooh, this is biased, or, ooh, this may be biased. Well, they all might be biased. You know, that's the whole point. You're expected to look through the bias, look at the reality, look at people's perception of the reality and say, right, given all the, you know, the drawbacks and the deficits with this source, I still feel that it does X, Y, and Z. So you're not being asked, is something biased? You're asked simply, how far does this source support the argument that X was due to Y, whatever it happens to be? You're not being asked about trustworthiness. You're not being asked about reliability, anything like that. Okay, so you leave all that to one side. You also get nil points for saying something like, oh, he was looking back on it at a 10-year break, so he might have forgotten. Okay, it's not the issue, and it's far too simplistic. Okay, you will, I'm hoping, live for many, many more years. And if in your 50s and 60s, you give an account of what it was like in the coronavirus lockdown, I think you'd be pretty upset if someone said, yeah, I interviewed them and I asked them about it, but, you know, it was 45 years ago, so they probably just forgot. No, people don't forget important things, okay? If we've got Asquith talking about, oh, I don't know, suffragettes, it's because he was thinking about suffragettes quite a lot. He knows what he thinks. Okay, so that's what you shouldn't do. Here's what you should do. What you need to do with each source, and you know this, but it's worth reminding you, is to look at three aspects: content, context, provenance. The content is the most straightforward bit. It's the meat and drink of a source. What's the source actually say? This is therefore the basis of your argument. And don't just look at what is being said, but how it is being said. Is it being said forcefully? Is it being said dismissively? You won't always find that there's a nice, a way of describing how a source says something, but if it's apparent, you should say so. The difference between context and provenance, though, is a subtle one, and content kind of stands alone, but context and provenance we need to spend a bit of time with. And I think probably the best way of doing this is I'm going to show you a mark scheme for a question which is not the question that you are doing. Oh, incidentally, I better point out that both groups are going to be doing a different question. Okay. Let's have a look at a mark scheme for what they say about context. Now, this mark scheme is talking about how in World War I, Asquith was replaced as Prime Minister by David Lloyd George. We haven't studied that, but you don't need to. Look at this. Okay. In discussing source B, and then some comments about the content, they could explain that Asquith was not able to keep his cabinet together and could be seen as responsible for the future split. Lloyd George is not seen as a contender and is not responsible here. Okay, but look what they say about provenance. In discussing the provenance of source B, answers might comment on the use of contemporary evidence, as there was a conversation in liberal circles on the weakness of Asquith's leadership. In discussing the provenance of source C, answers might comment on Asquith's obviously resentful tone in a private letter, the source was a private letter, in which he could show more vulnerability than a public speech. In discussing the provenance of source D, answers might point to the relationship between the author, who Lloyd George was having an affair with and later married, and Lloyd George. Even if he is responsible for the split, it is seen as necessary given Asquith's weakness. So what provenance is doing, provenance is talking about things which are, from within the source. What is the, well, look at it. Who is the author? That's the provenance. What is the background? What is their position? Lloyd George, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Asquith, Prime Minister, that kind of thing. Who are they friends with? What are their views on particular issues? Is it likely to have had an impact on what's being said? In what style do they appear to be making their arguments? Are they being logical? Are they being emotional? What in the source do we have as possible examples of this? So in other words, provenance is to do with the manufacturing of the source. I don't mean manufacturing in a fake way. I just mean what goes into that source. Context, however, is different. Context is stuff outside of the source that is happening, but which, the source is probably aware of. What is happening in the time period when the source is written? What is about to happen? Does the writer know that this is about to happen? What has previously happened? How does this affect the writer? And where in the source do we have possible examples of this? Look at the context here. Discussing the historical context of B, answers might argue that liberal unwillingness to face conscription and failure to see that hard decisions had to be made. The context of source C, they might question whether Asquith is being unrealistic because Lloyd George was a successful and dynamic minister. In discussing the historical context of source D, they might argue that by this stage in the war, a stronger leader was necessary. Okay, I think what's crucial is that they're calling it, look, historical context. Let's see if I can be really smart here. I tried this the other day and it just vanished. So I do that. Is it going to vanish or is it going to, looks like it might stay. Anyway, that is your key word. So key that I've managed to obscure it. Oh, it's gone. Thank goodness for that. Okay, I think that's quite enough of that. Point is, this is historical context. It's what's happening outside the source rather than what's happening within it. Okay, so every source that you look at, and you should look at all of the sources, should contain a lot of discussion about the content and a reasonable amount on the context and the provenance. You can use phrases like provenance and context if you want. If you feel it doesn't get in your way, you can say that. On the other hand, you might find it a bit clunky, but you certainly don't lose any marks. Okay, so how do you approach a question? Well, bear in mind what the question is at all times. Now, I can't tell you what question you're going to be facing, so I've made one up. You will not get a question about this because it's before the part of the course that deals with sources. It's before 1900. But imagine that you've been given 4 sources, all about Gladstone adopting Home Rule, And it says, the question is, using these four sources in their historical context, assess how far they support the view that Gladstone adopted Home Rule to drive Chamberlain out of the Liberal Party. Okay, so remember, the question is not, why did Gladstone adopt Home Rule? And the temptation for most students would be to begin an answer along those lines and say, oh, Gladstone did or did not adopt Home Rule to drive Chamberlain out of the Liberal Party, though other factors such as his desire to pacify Ireland may have played a major part. Right, that's wrong. Or, in the words of this PowerPoint, not right, but wrong. Wrong is more brutal, but it's true. Okay, that there, temptation is to begin. This is answering a different question. It is answering the question, why did Gladstone adopt Home Rule? It is not answering the question, how far do the sources support the view that Gladstone adopted Home Rule? Okay, you're talking about the sources, not about the events. So instead, a good beginning would be something along these lines. The sources support the view that Gladstone adopted Home Rule to drive Chamberlain out of the Liberal Party to a something extent, a small extent, a large extent. I don't know. It's up to you. There's no given answer. You know, it's your call. But this here is talking about the sources, and this is talking about events, and this is what you should be doing, talking about the sources. Okay? So that's how you structure it. But more specifically than that, if you're sitting down, you've got your paper in front of you, here's what you should do. Okay? Oh, yeah, you could also add, I suppose you said this, you say, oh, but source B suggests it was more of a moral decision or something like that. You put all the little, qualifiers in. So all of the sources strongly support the view that Gladstone adopted Home Rule to drive out Chamberlain, apart from source D, which suggests that Gladstone had a moral crusade to pacify Ireland or something. I don't know. It's up to you, but you can put caveats in. That's okay. Anyway, sorry. Back to the thing. How to approach the question, sort of more specifically. First up, open the paper. Okay, this is a sound effect. That is opening paper. Okay, well done. You've opened the paper. Before you read the question, genuinely, I would do this before reading the question. Read the four sources, including the bit in bold, which will be up the top and which will say something like a Liberal cabinet minister discusses, and the bit in italics, which will be down the bottom and says something like, oh, I don't know, usually we have David Lloyd George, Chancellor of the Exchequer, 1911, in a speech to the House of Commons, something like that. Okay, so you read the bit in bold, the bit in normal type, and the bit in italics, and that is to give you an idea about what kind of things they're talking about. You haven't read the question, but you're getting into the mentality, getting into the mindset. And then you read the question. And so you know what you're looking for. How far do the sources support the view that whatever? And then you reread the sources, going through them with a highlighter or a pencil or something, and underlining or highlighting the parts which seem to support or criticize the view that's stated in the question. What I would then do is I would put them in order. Okay? I mean, there's no punishment, if we can use that word, for just saying, well, I'm going to talk about source A, then source B, then source C, then source D. But if you begin by grouping them together, it gives you a structure, a way better structure than something kind of wildly veering from this source really does to this source really doesn't to the third source does a bit and the fourth source is really extreme. I would order them. Okay, all you need to do is write B, C, A, D, or whatever you think the order is, and it gives you some sort of structure. Yeah, because you can begin to group sources together and categorize them. And I would then plan the answer and write it using this most to least supportive approach. It's possible that in a class of 10, we'll get different variations of B, A, C, D. I mean, it may be that you want to do A, B, C, D because not because that's the way they fall, but actually because that's the most to least in your opinion. It's fine. There's no, if you come out of the exam and say, oh, did you say source C supported it the most? And they say, no, source D. You're both right, or you can both get full marks at least, because that's the subjective bit. The significant bit is you're engaging with the sources. Okay, now this has obviously not been an hour long recording, because what you're going to do now for the remainder of the hour, and hopefully for a bit longer, is prepare yourself for a sources question. So the next lesson that is scheduled, you will get 4 sources and a 30-mark question. You'll have to type it. I suppose if you really want to handwrite it, you can email it to me, having photographed it, but I would prefer you to just type it, and I'll put something on Free Learning to enable you to do that. I want you to spend the rest of this lesson now preparing for that by reviewing your knowledge of what happened and this information in this PowerPoint about how to approach such a question. The kind of topics that you might get are things that we've covered from the Boer War onwards. So the main areas there, and these are things where I've stood in front of you and explained them, and things where you've had resources emailed to you or got them off Free Learning, in no particular order: the Liberal election victory of 1906, Ireland in the Edwardian era, poverty, John Galt and Rowntree and Booth, national efficiency, the constitutional crisis, with the budget and the House of Lords and the Parliament Act, tariff reform, an evaluation of Balfour's government, and of course the significance of the Labour Party and organised worker labour during this time period. So it could be on any one of those. It won't be on a combination of them, because that's not what they're trying to do. It'll be on any one of those, different one for each set. Good luck. You will be fine. Email me if you have any questions, and I look forward, in inverted commas, to receiving your submissions. Thank you.